Long before the borders of modern Uganda were drawn, the region was a mosaic of diverse communities, each with unique traditions, cultures, and systems of governance. Among these, the Buganda Kingdom emerged as one of the most influential and enduring, shaping the history and identity of the region for centuries. Buganda's roots are deeply embedded in oral traditions, which trace the origins of the Baganda people to Kintu, revered as the first Muganda. The story of Kintu and his wife, Nombi, is not merely a tale of origins, but a symbolic narrative that continues to shape Buganda's identity. According to legend, Kintu arrived in the region with nothing but his cow and was tested by Nombi's father, Gulu, the god of the sky, before being allowed to marry her. The first task Kintu was given was to bring a cow from a distant, remote land, known for its wild and untamable nature. The king told Kintu that if he could capture this fierce cow and bring it back, he would prove his strength and determination to marry his daughter. Kintu, understanding the task's difficulty, didn't rely solely on force. He took time to study the habits of the cow, learning where it roamed and how it behaved. Instead of fighting the cow head-on, he set up traps and patiently lured it with food, eventually gaining its trust. After a long and careful journey, Kintu captured the wild cow and returned it to the king. This task proved that Kintu was strong, patient, wise, and capable of thinking through challenges. Secondly, Kintu was asked to make it rain. The king told Kintu, "If you can bring rain to the land, I will see that you are worthy to marry my daughter." This task was even more difficult, as no one had control over the weather. But Kintu, determined to prove his worth, turned to the power of nature. He climbed to the highest mountain in the land and, using his deep understanding of the forces of nature, he called upon the rain. After days of prayer and rituals, the skies darkened and rain began to pour down, bringing life to the dry lands. Kintu's success in this task demonstrated his deep connection with the natural world and his ability to bring prosperity to the people. After Kintu successfully completed the tasks, Gulu, the father of Nombi, was deeply impressed by his determination, wisdom, and strength. As a reward, Gulu granted Kintu permission to marry Nombi, his beloved daughter. However, Nombi had a brother named Walam, whose name meant death. On the day of their departure to start their new life together, Walam insisted on accompanying his sister. Nombi refused, knowing that if Walam came with them, he would bring death to the land. Following Gulu's instructions, Nombi and Kintu left quickly to avoid any interference from Walam. But as they journeyed, Nombi suddenly remembered that she had forgotten the millet she needed to feed her chickens. Against Kintu's advice, she decided to return to her father's home to retrieve it. Tragically, while Nombi was collecting the millet, Walam seized the opportunity and escaped, following her back to her new home with Kintu. From that moment, it is believed that Walam brought death into the world, and humanity has lived with its shadow ever since. Kintu and Nombi are said to have laid the foundation for a flourishing community, introducing systems of governance, social organization, and agriculture. While historians debate whether Kintu was a historical figure or a mythological construct, his story is central to the cultural and spiritual identity of Buganda, symbolizing unity, resilience, and prosperity. By the 14th century, Buganda had transformed from loosely connected clans into a centralized and organized kingdom under the leadership of a Kabaka, or king. The Kabaka was not merely a ruler in the political sense, he embodied a fusion of political, military, and spiritual authority, standing at the very heart of Buganda's identity. This position gave him immense power, but also significant responsibilities, as he was seen as the protector of his people and the intermediary between the spiritual realm and the earthly domain. The social structure of Buganda was intricately woven around clans, known as ebika, which were more than just familial groupings. They were the backbone of the kingdom's administration and culture. Each clan had a specific role or responsibility, contributing to the kingdom's functioning and cohesion. For example, some clans were tasked with blacksmithing, producing the tools and weapons that sustained daily life and warfare. Others specialized in hunting, ensuring a steady supply of food and resources. Still, others held spiritual roles, conducting rituals and maintaining the kingdom's connection to the divine. This division of labor not only promoted specialization, but also fostered a sense of unity and interdependence among the Baganda people. Buganda's early development was marked by its strategic location between Lake Victoria and the Nile River, which provided fertile land, abundant water resources, and access to trade routes. These advantages allowed the kingdom to grow economically and politically, setting the stage for its dominance in the region. Over time, the Kabakas expanded their influence, forging alliances with neighboring communities, consolidating power, and building a legacy that would endure for centuries. As the kingdom grew, so did the significance of its cultural traditions and governance systems. Oral histories, songs, and ceremonies played a vital role in preserving Buganda's identity, passing down knowledge and values from one generation to the next. This emphasis on cultural continuity helped Buganda navigate challenges and maintain its cohesion, even as the broader region experienced waves of migration, conflict, and change. By the dawn of the 15th century, Buganda had established itself as a formidable kingdom, with its centralization and social structures serving as a model for neighboring societies. The legacy of its early days, deeply rooted in the legend of Kintu and the wisdom of the Kabakas, continues to resonate, offering insights into the resilience and ingenuity of one of East Africa's most remarkable civilizations. After the foundational reign of Kabaka Kintu, Buganda began to expand rapidly under his successors, becoming a formidable power in the region. This expansion gained significant momentum during the 15th century, particularly under Kabaka Kimera. Kimera, one of the most renowned Kabakas in Buganda's early history, is remembered for his visionary leadership. He not only strengthened Buganda's military might but also restructured its administrative systems, creating a more efficient and unified kingdom. These reforms ensured that Buganda could handle the demands of a growing territory while maintaining order and stability. Kimera's military innovations included the introduction of more organized armies that were better equipped and trained than those of their neighbors. The kingdom also began fortifying its defenses, constructing strategic outposts, and rallying its clans to contribute warriors during times of war. These efforts enabled Buganda to annex surrounding territories, integrating them into its growing sphere of influence. By the time of Kabaka Kimera's successors, Buganda had expanded significantly, boasting fertile lands, thriving trade routes, and a steadily increasing population. The kingdom's geographical location played a crucial role in this expansion. Situated near the northern shores of Lake Victoria, Buganda benefited from the rich, fertile soils of the region, which supported agriculture and sustained its growing population. The lake itself served as a natural resource and transportation route, enabling trade with neighboring regions. The ability to control both land and water routes allowed Buganda to establish itself as a hub for commerce, fostering prosperity that further fueled its ambitions. Buganda's rise to power inevitably brought it into contact and competition with other kingdoms in the region, most notably Bunyoro. At the time, Bunyoro was one of the oldest and most established kingdoms in East Africa, known for its strong leadership and extensive territory. For much of the 16th and 17th centuries, Buganda and Bunyoro were locked in a fierce rivalry. The two kingdoms frequently clashed over land, resources, and influence. One of the main points of contention was the control of fertile lands and strategic trade routes. Buganda's agricultural success made it an attractive target, while its strategic location near Lake Victoria gave it access to waterways that Bunyoro sought to dominate. Over time, Buganda's growing strength enabled it to chip away at Bunyoro's territory, particularly in areas near the lake. Buganda's strategic advantage lay in its well-organized administration and its ability to mobilize resources effectively. While Bunyoro relied on its older systems of governance, Buganda adapted and innovated, ensuring its military and administrative structures were more flexible and responsive to change. The kingdom also relied on alliances with smaller neighboring communities, offering protection and trade opportunities in exchange for support during conflicts. For example, Buganda forged partnerships with certain clans in Busoga, a region to its east. While these relationships were not always stable, they often gave Buganda an edge in its conflicts with Bunyoro. Additionally, Buganda's leaders were known for their diplomacy, sometimes negotiating truces or alliances that allowed them to consolidate power without constant warfare. Buganda's economic prosperity further fueled its expansion. The kingdom's fertile land supported extensive banana plantations, a staple crop that provided a reliable food source for its people. This agricultural surplus allowed the kingdom to sustain large armies, freeing more people to focus on expansion and governance. Trade also played a key role, as Buganda became a center for the exchange of goods such as salt, iron tools, and pottery. Buganda's increasing wealth not only made it a dominant regional power, but also attracted artisans, merchants, and laborers from neighboring areas. This influx of talent and resources further strengthened the kingdom, allowing it to outpace rivals like Bunyoro in terms of innovation and cultural development. Meanwhile, the rivalry between Buganda and Bunyoro was more than a struggle for land, it was a contest for supremacy in the Great Lakes region. Although Buganda did not completely defeat Bunyoro during this period, it steadily gained the upper hand. By the 18th century, Buganda's influence had surpassed Bunyoro's, marking a turning point in the region's history. The conflicts also shaped Buganda's identity, as stories of victories and resilience became part of its oral traditions and cultural pride. As Buganda continued to grow in strength and influence, the kingdom entered a new era in the 19th century with the arrival of foreign powers. This period brought profound changes, forever altering the trajectory of Buganda and its relationship with neighboring kingdoms. Just as Buganda had consolidated its dominance over regional rivals like Bunyoro through military and economic expansion, it now faced the challenges and opportunities posed by external influences. The first significant foreign contact came through Arab traders who arrived in Buganda around the early 1840s. These traders, primarily from the Swahili coast, introduced not only new goods but also new ideas. Their caravans carried firearms, beads, and fine cloth, items that quickly became highly sought after in the kingdom. The introduction of firearms, in particular, had a transformative impact on the balance of power in the region. Equipped with superior weaponry, Buganda's armies became even more formidable, allowing the kingdom to solidify its dominance over its neighbors. Alongside their goods, the Arab traders brought the Islamic faith. Islam began to take root among some members of Buganda's elite, particularly those who saw advantages in aligning with the traders for access to goods and knowledge. While Islam did not immediately displace traditional Buganda spiritual beliefs, it introduced new cultural and religious dynamics that would later shape the kingdom's interactions with other foreign influences. In 1862, British explorer John Hanning Speke arrived at the court of Kabaka Mutesa, marking the beginning of European interest in Buganda. Speke was fascinated by Buganda's well-organized society, its strong leadership, and its strategic location near Lake Victoria. His accounts of Buganda drew the attention of European powers, setting the stage for deeper interactions between Buganda and the Western world. Kabaka Mutesa, who ruled from 1856 to 1884, proved to be a pivotal figure in Buganda's response to foreign influences. Mutesa is remembered as a shrewd and pragmatic leader who recognized the potential benefits of engaging with the outside world. Building on the kingdom's legacy of adaptability and strategic thinking, Mutesa sought to position Buganda as a key player in the emerging global context. Mutesa's openness to foreign visitors led to the arrival of Christian missionaries in the 1870s. Recognizing the influence these missionaries wielded, he allowed both Catholic and Protestant missions to operate in Buganda. Mutesa's decision was driven in part by his desire to balance the competing interests of the Arab traders, who were spreading Islam, and the Europeans, who brought Christianity and modern technologies. The introduction of Christianity had far-reaching consequences. While it offered access to education and new technologies, it also deepened divisions within Buganda. Catholic and Protestant missionaries competed fiercely for converts, leading to the formation of rival factions within the kingdom. These religious divisions began to intertwine with political alliances, creating tensions that would later erupt into open conflict. The arrival of foreign influences also transformed Buganda's economy. European explorers and missionaries introduced new crops such as coffee and cotton, which became important cash crops for the kingdom. These crops further enhanced Buganda's wealth and influence, reinforcing its role as a regional powerhouse. Culturally, the influx of foreign ideas began to challenge traditional Buganda practices. For example, the emphasis on monotheistic religions like Islam and Christianity conflicted with Buganda's deeply rooted spiritual beliefs, which were tied to the land, the spirits of ancestors, and the Kabaka's role as a semi-divine figure. While many Buganda embraced these new faiths, others resisted, leading to a complex and often uneasy coexistence of old and new traditions. The deepening religious divisions created rifts within the kingdom, weakening its unity and making it more vulnerable to external manipulation. These tensions would later erupt during the reign of Mutesa's successor, Kabaka Mwanga II, as Buganda grappled with the pressures of colonization and internal strife. Also known as Mwanga II, was a pivotal figure in the history of Buganda. Born around 1868 at Nkawa, he ascended the throne as Kabaka at the tender age of 16, following the death of his father. Reign, spanning from 1884 to 1888 and then from 1889 to 1897, was marked by his determined resistance against colonialism, primarily through opposition to the religious forces that paved the way for European domination. Mwanga inherited a kingdom deeply influenced by these foreign religious ideologies, but chose a far more confrontational approach. Unlike his father, Mwanga viewed Christianity as a direct threat to Buganda's traditional power structures and sought to root out its influence, leading to his infamous clashes with both missionaries and local converts. By the time Mwanga took power, British Christian missionaries had firmly established themselves in Buganda. The British, though not yet fully armed colonialists, used religion as a tool to gain influence over the kingdom. Mwanga recognized the destabilizing effect Christianity had on his authority. For example, some of his subjects, including palace servants, began rejecting traditional practices, even refusing the king's advances, citing their newfound Christian beliefs. Such defiance was unprecedented for a king whose authority was traditionally absolute. This perceived rebellion enraged Mwanga, who decided to take drastic measures to curb the influence of Christianity. In 1885, Mwanga's resistance culminated in the assassination of Bishop James Hannington, a prominent missionary attempting to enter Buganda through its eastern borders. Mwanga saw Hannington's arrival as a direct threat to his kingdom and ordered his execution on October 29, 1885. It is believed that Mwanga had been warned by his ancestors that any foreigner entering his kingdom from the east would pose a direct threat to his throne and the sovereignty of Buganda. However, it also drew the ire of the British and Christian factions within Buganda. Mwanga's most infamous action was the persecution of Christian converts within his court. In May 1886, he demanded that all converts renounce their faith or face execution. When they refused, Mwanga ordered their deaths. 22 Catholic converts, later canonized as the Ugandan martyrs, were burned alive at Namagongo. These executions shocked the world and further solidified British support for Christian factions in Buganda. Mwanga's actions ignited a rebellion supported by Christian and Muslim factions within Buganda. In 1888, he faced a coup that dethroned him in favor of his half-brother, Kiwewa. However, Kiwewa's reign lasted only a month before he was replaced by another brother. Despite these setbacks, Mwanga's resilience remained unshaken. He negotiated with the British East Africa Company, promising to cede some of his sovereignty in exchange for their assistance in reclaiming his throne. With British support, Mwanga regained power in 1889 and even converted to Christianity, a pragmatic move to placate his allies. However, Mwanga's relationship with the British was short-lived. In 1894, Buganda became a British protectorate, a status Mwanga initially accepted. But by 1897, he realized the implications of this arrangement and launched a rebellion to regain full sovereignty. On July 6, 1897, Mwanga declared war on the British. Despite his determination, his forces were decisively defeated on July 20, 1897, in Budu, present-day Masaka. Mwanga fled to German East Africa, modern-day Tanzania, but was captured and imprisoned. He escaped once more and returned to Buganda, raising another army in a final attempt to reclaim his throne. This effort also ended in failure, and he was captured on January 15, 1898. The British exiled Mwanga to the Seychelles, marking the end of his reign. While in exile, Mwanga converted to the Anglican faith, adopting the name Danieri, Daniel. He lived out his final years in relative obscurity, dying on May 8, 1903, at approximately 35 years of age. 7 years later, in 1910, his remains were repatriated to Buganda and interred at Kasubi, where they remain to this day. By the late 19th century, the age of imperialism was in full swing, and the scramble for Africa brought profound changes to Buganda and the surrounding region. European powers, driven by economic interests and a desire for territorial dominance, carved the African continent into colonies. Buganda, with its strategic location, strong centralized governance, and rich resources, quickly became the target of British imperial ambitions. Buganda's official entry into the colonial era came in 1894, when the British declared the kingdom a protectorate. This status was different from outright colonization. It allowed Buganda to retain some of its traditional structures, including the role of the Kabaka king, while placing ultimate authority in the hands of British administrators. For Buganda, this was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the kingdom's leadership saw an opportunity to protect its autonomy by aligning with the powerful British Empire. On the other hand, the arrangement marked the beginning of significant foreign control over its affairs. This relationship was formalized in the Buganda Agreement of 1900, a landmark document that fundamentally reshaped the kingdom's governance and land ownership. Under the agreement, the Kabaka and his chiefs retained a degree of authority, but they were effectively transformed into colonial administrators, implementing British policies in the region. The agreement also redefined land ownership, dividing Buganda's territory into plots controlled by the elite. The Kabaka, chiefs, and other influential figures were granted ownership of vast tracts of land, while the majority of Buganda became tenants working on land they no longer owned. The colonial system introduced profound economic and social changes that disrupted traditional ways of life in Buganda. One of the most significant shifts was the introduction of cash crops, particularly cotton. The British encouraged, often coerced, Buganda farmers to grow cotton for export, as it was a highly profitable commodity on the global market. While cotton cultivation brought new economic opportunities for some, it also caused widespread upheaval upheaval. Traditional subsistence farming, which had sustained communities for generations, was deprioritized in favor of cash crops. This shift left many Baganda vulnerable to food shortages, as land that had once been used to grow staple crops like bananas was now dedicated to cotton. Furthermore, the profits from cotton exports largely benefited the colonial administration and the local elite, deepening economic inequalities within Buganda. The reorganization of land ownership under the Buganda Agreement created a system of stark inequality. Chiefs and other elites, who had traditionally been stewards of the land on behalf of their clans, now became landowners in the colonial sense, with the power to charge rent to tenants. This system, known as Malo land tenure, led to widespread discontent among ordinary Baganda, who were forced to pay rent for the very land they and their ancestors had cultivated for generations. For many, this new system represented a betrayal of traditional values and communal practices. Land, once considered a shared resource tied to the identity and survival of clans, had become a commodity. This shift not only caused economic hardship but also eroded the social fabric of Buganda, as traditional relationships between chiefs and their communities were replaced by more exploitative, hierarchical arrangements. The colonial era was not without resistance. While the British sought to present their protectorate system as mutually beneficial, many Baganda grew increasingly dissatisfied with the loss of autonomy and the inequities of the new economic order. Discontent simmered among tenant farmers, who felt exploited by both the colonial administration and the Buganda elite. This growing dissatisfaction would later fuel the rise of nationalist movements in Uganda. Many of these movements were initially rooted in Buganda, where the kingdom's long tradition of centralized leadership and political organization provided a foundation for resistance. However, Buganda's privileged position within the protectorate also created tensions with other regions, as many Ugandans outside Buganda viewed the kingdom as complicit in the colonial system. Buganda's status as a British protectorate was both a unique arrangement and a precursor to the creation of modern Uganda. The British, eager to consolidate their control over the region, began to merge Buganda with neighboring territories to form a single colony. This process was driven by economic interests, as the British sought to integrate the region's resources and labor into their empire. In 1926, the boundaries of Uganda as a colony were formalized, encompassing Buganda and other regions with diverse cultures, languages, and political systems. While Buganda retained a special status within this new colony, the creation of Uganda set the stage for future conflicts, as the kingdom's leaders sought to preserve their autonomy in a larger, multi-ethnic state. The mid-20th century was a period of significant political change across Africa. The devastation of World War II had weakened European colonial powers, and the rise of nationalist movements challenged the legitimacy of colonial rule. In Uganda, these forces converged in the decades following the war, setting the stage for independence. However, the journey to self-rule was complex, shaped by internal divisions and the unique role of Buganda in the emerging nation. In the 1940s and 1950s, dissatisfaction with colonial rule grew across Uganda. Many Ugandans resented the economic inequalities and political restrictions imposed by the British. Buganda, as the most politically and economically influential kingdom within the colony, played a central role in these early movements. While some Baganda elites sought to preserve their privileged status within the colonial framework, others joined broader calls for independence. Recognizing the need for a united effort to end colonialism, political parties began to emerge as vehicles for these aspirations. The Uganda National Congress (UNC), founded in 1952, was one of the first political organizations to demand self-rule. Led by figures such as Ignatius Musazi, the UNC appealed to Ugandans from diverse regions and ethnic groups, calling for unity in the struggle against colonialism. However, the party faced challenges in bridging the deep divisions between Uganda's various ethnic and regional identities. The Democratic Party, DP, founded in 1956, offered an alternative vision for Uganda's future. Rooted in Catholic traditions, the DP attracted support from many Baganda Catholics, who felt marginalized by the Protestant-dominated political landscape. These emerging parties highlighted the challenges of building a cohesive nationalist movement in a country as diverse as Uganda. Buganda's relationship with the broader independence movement was both influential and complicated. As the most politically organized and economically powerful kingdom, Buganda held a unique position in Uganda's colonial structure. The kingdom's leadership, particularly the Kabaka king, sought to maintain Buganda's autonomy, even as calls for a united Uganda grew louder. For many Baganda. The prospect of a united Uganda posed a threat to their cultural and political identity. Buganda's elite feared that independence could lead to the kingdom being overshadowed by other regions, particularly in a democratic system where the larger ethnic groups, such as the Akali and Langi in the north, could dominate. As a result, Buganda's leaders often pursued a cautious approach to independence, seeking assurances that the kingdom's autonomy would be preserved in the post-colonial state. In 1962, Uganda finally achieved independence, marking the end of nearly 7 decades of British colonial rule. Milton Obote, the leader of the Uganda People's Congress (UPC), became the country's first prime minister. Obote's rise to power was facilitated by an alliance with Buganda's leadership, which saw the UPC as a preferable alternative to other political forces that threatened Buganda's interests. However, this alliance was short-lived. The relationship between Obote and the Kabaka, Sir Edward Mutesa II, quickly deteriorated. As Kabaka of Buganda, Mutesa II also held the symbolic role of Uganda's president, a largely ceremonial position created to appease Buganda's demands for autonomy. Obote, as prime minister, wielded real executive power, and tensions between the two leaders escalated as their visions for Uganda's future clashed. In 1966, political tensions were simmering beneath the surface in Uganda and Buganda at large. Obote, who had risen to power as the leader of the Uganda People's Congress, sought to centralize power in the hands of the government, away from the kingdom system that Mutesa represented. This power struggle came to a head in May of that year. After a severe back and forth between the two, Obote ordered the army to storm the Kabaka's palace, and the Kabaka was a target. His palace was surrounded, and in a desperate attempt to protect his life and his kingdom, Mutesa fled the country after jumping over the fence. It is said at first the army feared that Mutesa had an electric gun. So what they first did was to cut off electricity. The army was led by Amin, a man who would later overthrow Obote to become president. The circumstances were chaotic. There are accounts of Mutesa narrowly escaping the military's wrath, fleeing to exile in London. His departure marked the beginning of a new, darker chapter in Uganda's history. The Kabaka was stripped of his title and became a symbol of the crushing of Buganda's autonomy under Obote's rule. In the years that followed, Mutesa would live in exile, never to return to the throne. He would later die in 1969, supposedly due to poisoning by Obote's allies. But the story of Uganda was far from over. Obote's actions, driven by an ambition to consolidate power, would come back to haunt him. The country that had once cheered his rise to power began to feel the weight of his authoritarian rule. The political climate was unstable, and in 1971, Obote's government was overthrown in a coup led by the army, now under the command of General Idi Amin. Amin's rule marked a stark contrast to Obote's. He promised to bring peace and prosperity, but what followed was a regime marked by cruelty and fear. Thousands were executed, imprisoned, or tortured under his orders, one of them being Archbishop Janan Luwum. The economy was crippled, and Uganda's reputation on the world stage became synonymous with dictatorship and oppression. Amin's rise to power was swift, but so was his downfall. After nearly 8 years of brutal rule, in 1979, a coalition of forces, including Ugandan exiles and the Tanzanian military, overthrew Amin. His departure from power was as chaotic as his rise. Amin fled to Saudi Arabia, where he would live in exile, where he would later die in 2003. After Amin was overthrown, a transitional government was established under the leadership of Yusuf Lule, a prominent Ugandan academic and political leader. Lule was appointed president by the Uganda National Liberation Front, UNLF, a coalition of opposition groups that had fought against Amin's regime, with the support of the Tanzanian military. Lule's time as president was very brief, lasting only from April 13 to June 20, 1979. His presidency was marked by efforts to restore order and rebuild Uganda's political and economic systems. However, his tenure was plagued by internal divisions within the UNLF and a lack of support from key military and political factions. Amid growing tensions and opposition, Lule was ousted by a coup within his own government and replaced by Godfrey Beneza. Godfrey Beneza took office as president in June 1979. Beneza was a lawyer and former UNLF member. His presidency was also short-lived, lasting until May 1980. Although he was initially seen as a more unifying figure, Beneza faced considerable opposition from various factions, particularly the military and the political elite. His government struggled to assert authority, and his leadership was further undermined by the involvement of military commanders and political rivalries. In 1980, Beneza was ousted in a military coup led by Paul Muwaawa, the head of the military government. The coup was part of a larger conflict between different factions within Uganda's liberation groups, and Beneza's removal set the stage for further instability in the country. In December 1980, Milton Obote, who had been ousted by Idi Amin in 1971, returned to power through a controversial election that was marred by allegations of fraud and manipulation. Obote had been living in exile in Tanzania since his overthrow, and he was supported by the Uganda People's Congress, UPC, the political party he had led before Amin's coup. Obote's return to power did not bring peace to Uganda. His second presidency was marked by a civil war between his government and rebel forces, particularly the National Resistance Army, NRA, led by Yoweri Museveni, which had been formed to resist Obote's return. The conflict, which had its roots in Uganda's deeper ethnic and regional divisions, was brutal, and thousands of Ugandans were caught in the crossfire. Obote's government was also accused of human rights abuses, repression of political opponents, and corruption. His presidency failed to stabilize the country, and Uganda's economy remained in disarray. In July 1985, after nearly 5 years of conflict and mismanagement, Obote's government was overthrown by a coup led by General Tito Okello, the leader of the military. Obote was forced into exile again, and Okello assumed the presidency, leading the Military Council of Uganda. However, Okello's government was short-lived, and he failed to gain widespread support. The fall of Obote marked the final collapse of his second regime, but Uganda's political problems were far from over. The country was still torn by civil war, and Okello's rule did little to bring an end to the fighting. In January 1986, the National Resistance Army, NRA, led by Yoweri Museveni, succeeded in capturing Kampala and overthrowing Tito Okello's government. This marked the beginning of Museveni's presidency, which continues to this day. Museveni's ascent to power marked the end of the long period of instability that had plagued Uganda since the 1960s. Museveni promised to bring peace and reform to Uganda, and his government embarked on rebuilding the country's infrastructure, restoring political stability, and introducing democratic reforms. Over time, Museveni consolidated power, moving from a more transitional, broad-based government to a more authoritarian regime. So, what do you think of this story about Uganda and the Buganda Kingdom? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, let us know which other regions you'd like us to explore in our next story. Peace.